Hello, and welcome to this episode of Smart Talk, Data and Emotional Leadership Series. I'm your host, Dinesh Chandrasekhar, and today we have a very exciting guest, Ajay Kulkarni, the CEO of Timescale DB. He's no stranger to the data world. He's been working with databases for the last 30 years, and he founded Timescale DB almost like 7 years ago. And we are seeing some phenomenal news and updates from Timescale today. And I am super excited to have you on the show today, Ajay. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So let's kick it off by just asking you this very vanilla question. Tell us about Timescale. I'm sure a lot of people know, but also for the folks in the audience that do not know who Timescale is, it'll be good to give you like a 30-second intro about um, you and the company.
Yeah, Timescale, as you mentioned, we launched it about 7 years ago. In that period of time, we've seen phenomenal growth, millions of active databases, uh, thousands of customers, probably 10x that in our community. Raised 180 million in funding from top investors like NEA, Benchmark, Redpoint, Two Sigma Ventures, Tiger, and yeah, we're building the next great database company, and we're doing this by really anchoring on Postgres and making Postgres better for its core use case, but also for new use cases. We started off in time series. We just actually today launched some new open source projects that make Postgres even better for AI workloads and vector workloads, outperforming Pinecone. Um, but high level, next great database company. We've been on this ride for 7 years, and every year it feels like another level in the rocket ship.
Thank you. So, with your experience and having been in the industry for this long, what specific trend are you seeing in the database world today? Because every day we are hearing announcements like what you just said. Every other company is like making like a splash of a news, and so what is it that you see as a trend happening today?
It's really fascinating. So I've been using databases for decades, as you mentioned. We started this company and then launched the product 7 years ago. When we started, like we knew very little about the database business. We know how to use databases, a little bit of business. But since then, we've been students, and in some ways, we've become kind of leaders, thought leaders in the space. Uh, and we've seen a lot. I think like probably the biggest trend we've seen is that for a long time there was an explosion of databases for every use case. Maybe 20 years ago, you had maybe five databases, that you could use. Now they're like 500. And that's what we saw for like probably the first several years. But what we've noticed in the last year has been this growing desire for simplification, and there's almost this growing war cry amongst a certain group of developers uh, for just to use Postgres for everything. And in fact, I think Postgres is now, as of last year, is now the most loved database in the Stack Overflow survey, just beating up MySQL. So I think that's the biggest trend is after decades of this like Cambrian explosion of databases, we're seeing this kind of like consolidation again, pendulum swinging backwards, but really to Postgres.
So, a contrarian view here. So, having worked in the data management space for the last couple of decades, my vantage point says that, yes, there are databases, yes, there is convergence happening on a lot of different AI levels, but there is also data warehouses, there are data lakes and time series databases, and everything has its place, everything has its sets of use cases and stuff. In a traditional enterprise today, I'm sure you're seeing probably beyond Timescale's presence, there are also these other databases in the enterprise. What are some of the real challenges that you think those enterprises face when they have these plethora of, footprints of databases that they are dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, so two things. First is I think about the database market kind of loosely, like the smartphone market. Pre-iPhone, you travel with, I mean, maybe 10 years before the iPhone, you had like your portable phone, you had your email device, like a BlackBerry Messenger, probably, right? BlackBerry device. When I traveled with my Discman, and I traveled with
We
like
both are dating ourselves, I'm sure.
a digital camera. Yeah, right, exactly. Digital camera, like a flip video camera flip. You travel all these things. And with the iPhone, you just have one thing. And even lately, like I don't even take my credit cards or my wallet when I go out. I just pay with my phone. And you see this convergence, and it's like, is there a market for digital SLRs? Yeah. But like that market has shrunk over time as the iPhone has gotten better and better, and like good enough has gotten pretty great, right? And the same thing for video cameras. Is there a market for GoPros? Of course, but like iPhone video is, I'm sure, like orders of magnitude, used more often, and BlackBerry's essentially went away, And so I think like in general, uh, that is the kind of trend we're seeing is this desire towards simplicity. And there are two things that are happening. One is compute is just getting more powerful and cheaper, and storage keeps getting cheaper. And Postgres also keeps getting more powerful. And you get these three things combined, you kind of have this world where this one database has been good enough for more and more things. So your second part of the question is, what does this mean for the enterprise? Enterprise, is obviously a very different decision process than if you're a new startup building from scratch. What we found is kind of two major places where this trend fits in the enterprise. One is, look, every enterprise has new workloads. Every company is experimenting with AI these days and LLMs, and I think anytime you're building a new application, you have an opportunity to try a new stack, and I think that's where we're seeing a lot of Postgres adoption. There's another thing we've seen um, anywhere from kind of digital native companies, but also to traditional industrials that are 100 years old is as companies are modernizing their infrastructure, their digitizing infrastructure, software transformation, whatever you want to call it, they're looking for, kind of open source databases to replace a lot of the
Mm.
proprietary ones they've maybe used for decades. And this replatforming, this modernization of your infrastructure, this replatforming the cloud also gives you an opportunity to do that. And that's another place where we see Postgres really come in. And in fact, like it's a really interesting trend we've noticed that we wrote a blog post about this. We call the Postgres the bird horse of databases, and it's this idea that it's a database that's essentially contradictory, where you have this group of startups who are, building next gen AI tools like a Copilot for Git history, choosing Postgres. And then you see these traditional industrials who have been around for 100, 150 years who are choosing Postgres as well, but for different reasons. They're choosing it because it's open source and it's modern, but it's also financially a lot cheaper than paying a proprietary vendor. And those two things combined, you have this really interesting distribution of usage that's unlike anything I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, and I like your analogy on the iPhone example that you said. I mean, interesting with the news yesterday. It seems like not only are we carrying Discmans and everything in our iPhone, we're also carrying an AI engine as well. That's also going to happen very soon. But going back to your response about how enterprises are leveraging and the challenges that they're facing, how they are overcoming it, and all that, share with us some of the use cases that you're seeing with this type of diverse set of data stores, kind of infrastructure that or data architectures that enterprises are dealing with. What kind of use cases are you, from your vantage point, seeing?
It's a great question. Well, we see a couple things. First, new startups, we're seeing quite a bit within the worlds of IoT, crypto, AI. That one company I mentioned, building a Copilot for Git history is a great example of a modern application that wasn't possible 2 years ago. They ingest just kind of Git commit history, off of GitHub, and they can essentially let you ask questions like, "Hey, like, who was the most, who's contributed the most, who's more often, what type of contributions have happened recently? Can you summarize the latest commits?" Um, that's useful for a variety of reasons. We have another company that is essentially ingesting news articles and analyzing them and essentially using that to let their customers ask, "Hey, like this thing happened yesterday. Why did it happen?" And what they can do is they can actually translate that into the articles that they found, and then they take that whole thing and they summarize it and they give it back to their
Yeah,
customer.
I loved your example of that GitHub events capture company. Uh, I mean, this talk is all about like data in motion, so I'm very interested particularly in that particular one because we are talking about like millions and millions of events and data that is being captured across GitHub, across all these different hundreds of thousands of projects. and I'm sure the database size is like, ginormous. I read a little bit about that particular case study, and I saw the kind of like ingest that happened and all that. So truly, commendable to see that kind of scale and everything. But what I'm interested in is when you talk about a time series database, I can clearly see that use case is like absolutely practical, where you're talking about every single event that happened at a specific time, and you're like, wanting to capture all those in a time series database, which makes absolute sense. But now the extension to the story is what makes it more interesting for me with your announcement that went live today. So again, share that as well as you explain your answer of your vector database announcement, how this fits into this particular use case. Like, why would this company also extend their existing time series database footprint into the vector conversation? Like, how does that happen? Like, what has that use case evolved into? Is it that NLP example that you just gave about like, querying with like, natural parameters of like, which is the project that is getting the most number of committers and things like that? Is that what is like driving that same time series example into the vector conversation?
So our mission at Timescale, it's not about time series, it's not about Postgres, it's not about even a database. Our mission is to serve developers so that they can build the future and really serve developers, be of service to them, help them unblock them. And we find that really exciting because we believe by doing that, we can accelerate the future and make it happen sooner, which I don't know, I find really cool. So as part of that, we've started off solving problems in the time series domain for developers. And then increasingly what we found is that, uh, we serve our customers. We keep hearing from our customers some of their AI challenges around vector databases. And we thought, well, we could kind of address those as well. And so what we open source today is a culmination of several months of effort by a really tight kind of R&D team at Timescale. Two extensions, PG Vector Scale and PG AI, that are essentially designed two open source projects that are designed to make Postgres the best database for AI. Now, again, why Postgres? Well, we we see what we hear from developers is that what they're really craving is simplicity in their operational stack, simplicity in their database. Databases, I often hear, it's kind of like your Wi-Fi. If you have to think about it, that means something's wrong. You want to like not think about it. You want to just work, right? And what we've heard is okay, like the answer to this problem is Postgres, Postgres for everything. And then we ask ourselves, okay, then we made Postgres the best database for time series. Can we make it the best database for AI? And we found that we could, and we open sourced it all because look, our competition isn't other Postgres folks. It's everything that's not Postgres. And that's what we open source today. And I mean, it's already generating revenue. We already have some of our customers using it. It's generated a ton of buzz today. Um, but yeah, I think that's how this all fits together. And I think the key part is like, we are not weirdly passionate about, you know, open source or databases or time series. We're really passionate about is serving developers. And by doing that, accelerating the future.
Yeah, thank you. And congratulations on the launch once again.
Yeah.
So since you spoke about the mindset of the developer, right, and Postgres, obviously, open source and all that, what's been your outlook on the open source community in the last decade, and how has it changed? I'm asking this purely from the context of um, making money,
Ha!
right? On one hand, we have
Yeah.
developers whom we serve, love the open source community. I come from that world, uh, been, catering to that audience for a long time. I know the value of open source communities. On the other hand, as a business vendor, as a database vendor, you got to make money, right? So you cannot give it all away for free. So how do you look at balancing this act, and how do you make sure that you are serving the open source community, but at the same time, adding value to your customer?
Long story short, it's a really fascinating space, rapidly changing. Our approach at Timescale has been to have innovative licensing that is essentially like if you think about proprietary and open source on a spectrum, it's like one notch below open source. It's free, it's source available. You can do anything you want with it, except offer it as a DBaaS, as the database
Mm.
as a service. Which means if you have an IoT SaaS application or crypto or this AI tool, yeah, cool, totally fine. You just can't offer it as a database as a service. And we've done that primarily to block out the hyperscalers so we could build a business. But with this AI project today, we're actually taking an even different approach, which is we just made it all open source, and there's some other ideas we have on how to monetize it. So I think it is evolving, and I think one thing I would encourage the community is just to look at this with open eyes, because at the end of the day, uh, if these projects are not self-sustainable, then they're not going to exist. But it is changing, and I'm really excited to see the changes.
Yeah. So I got one other question based on probably our history as well, that the
Hmm.
audience doesn't know. So for folks that do not know, 2019 IoT World, Ajay and I were on a panel together, and we talked
And you were
about,
wearing a great blazer, if I
yeah,
recall correctly. I think I
yeah,
just had a t-shirt on and you had like this great, I think this blue blazer. Anyway, yeah.
exactly. So we had a great conversation. I think it was really good that we spoke about IoT and all that. But recently, I read on one of your blog posts that 2010s was the decade of the IoT, and then 2020s is the decade of AI. Is that how you look at it as well? Is like the IoT conversations like have fizzled out, or is it like still happening that the AI conversations are like, drowning out the IoT noise, or like, what's happening?
I think it's additive. It's like a layer cake. And so I think one would probably say that the 2007 to 2014 was the era of smartphone apps, right? And doesn't mean smartphone apps are dead today or there's no usage. No, of course not. There's a ton of usage. But it just means that like, this early era of like excitement and like kind of
Yeah.
frontier like thinking has now kind of matured, and you have like a few companies that have, essentially become like the main players in the ecosystem. You probably saw the same thing with the internet. That the internet in the 90s was like the Wild West, right? And then, in the 2000s, it eventually kind of consolidated a few key players. I think what we're seeing in AI right now is the next wave, the next layer cake. Um, IoT is still really strong. It's still growing. It's still a key part of our business. Um, and AI is not like it's kind of like this orthogonal layer, like every IoT company is thinking about AI, So does that mean is it replacing AI? No, it's just it's additive. Um, but I think like from my vantage point, and probably yours as well, having worked in technology for years, what's happening right now in AI is like the most exciting thing I've seen. I mean, definitely since the iPhone, maybe even since the internet, circa 95, 96. I remember being, playing with the internet, back then, thinking like, I have no idea what's going to happen with this, but it's just cool. It's just like something's going to happen, And I was in high school at the time, and that's why I decided to major in computer science when I went to college. And with AI right now, I feel the same thing. I'm just like, dude, like when I see what our customers are doing, uh, I'm like, wow, like we are just like we just like were gifted all these Lego pieces, and we haven't even explored the different things you can build with them. We haven't even know what all the pieces look like. And that's what I find really exciting. And it's additive. I think IoT will benefit. I think every industry is going to benefit. Um, are there some challenges? Yes. But I'm a techno optimist, and I'm excited about it.
And I used to think, at least until last year, that AI is like more like the icing on the cake rather than a layer by itself. But looks like, it's definitely becoming a layer of its own. I think it's definitely something to be taken
I
seriously.
mean, with anything, it's like V1 is icing. V1 of websites were just like the online presence of the retail storefront,
Yeah.
you know? V1 of mobile apps were just like the mobile version of the website, you know? And then you had like mobile first applications like Uber that were just like, no, the website's like doesn't even matter, or like Instagram or TikTok, And I think with AI, like I think V1, what you'll see is people building AI into their existing products, which we're already starting to see, right? But V2 is like, and I think we haven't really even seen these yet. It's like true AI native applications. And yeah, it's going to be crazy. It's going to be wild.
All right, we'll wrap this up. This is fantastic. I just want to give you like one last opportunity to like talk to us about like some of the future-looking trends and perspectives from your vantage point. You again. sit as a CEO of a hot database company, working in the crux of like some of the hottest use cases across, time series and vectors and whatnot. And so, I feel like you are definitely seeing a lot more excitement happening around you. I just heard you say that you were talking with ChatGPT, I'm sorry, with OpenAI and stuff.
I talk to ChatGPT every day, by the way. But yes,
My
but
bad.
but I was chatting with
OpenAI
yeah,
and
yeah,
ChatGPT
exactly.
was the
OpenAI earlier
synonymous
today.
thing
That's
that came out.
right.
But yeah, I mean, so tell me about like, what's going on from
Yeah.
your vantage point. How do you see the next, 2 or 3 years evolving?
Yeah, I mean the trends like I mean first let's just like extrapolate from like current trends, right? Every company is becoming a software company or is getting replaced by a software company. Those are your two options, right? Great software is essentially built on data, and data and databases are the kind of the heartblood of like these companies now, right? And then you take that a step further and you say, okay, like if this is a key component to your business, do you want like 100 kind of pieces working together in some group global architecture, or do you want simplicity? You want simplicity. And so
Mhm.
that's where Postgres for everything comes up. Uh, and the other trend we're seeing is like people talk about AI applications. Everything is going to be an AI application. You know, it's like it's like that old cartoon. It's like, what does your mom do? She works with computers. Oh, like as opposed to what? You know, like it's almost everyone works with a computer these days, but it's on your phone or on your, on the desktop. And so I think the future is that like AI for everything, Postgres for everything, and every business is either embracing this or will get replaced. I think that should drive a certain level of urgency, but also hopefully creativity and excitement. I almost have this like visceral feeling that like this meteor just hit planet Earth, and like there are a bunch of dinosaurs who won't be able to evolve, who are going to not survive, and there are a bunch of scrappy little mammals we're gonna figure out as and it's kind of what we're seeing right now, and it's creative destruction or whatever that phrase is, and I am someone who embraces change and embraces that kind of work, but that's what we're seeing. I think if I were to make any recommendations, I would say that if you haven't fully embraced AI, embrace it and just learn as much as you can. There's some great tutorials out there. We have some great blogs. There's some great books as well that you could read. Because I think it's gonna be a key part of everything like we do for the future.
Love it. Ajay, thank you so much for your succinct but clear, very clear answers. I love the conversation. It's always good to talk to you. Appreciate you joining us on this episode. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you again for having me.